Griffin Powell, 42, looked like the kind of man nobody noticed. Most people in Seattle believed he was just another tech employee with a steady paycheck. He drove an aging Toyota Camry, wore faded gray hoodies, and packed his own lunch. What they didn't know was that the company he helped build had just gone public, making him worth hundreds of millions overnight. Then, a knock echoed through his front hallway. Griffin opened the door, took the envelope, and froze when he saw the sender's name, Natalie Powell, his wife. Before we continue, leave a comment telling me your country and local time. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is watching from. And if you enjoy stories about patience betrayal and unexpected reversals, subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. The envelope remained unopened on Griffin Powell's kitchen counter for almost 20 minutes, not because he was afraid of what was inside, because he already knew the filing date, the timing, the calculated precision of it. None of it felt accidental. Outside, the Seattle morning continued as if nothing unusual had happened. A delivery truck rolled down the street. A neighbor walked his golden retriever past Griffin's driveway. The coffee machine on the counter clicked softly as it switched itself off. Inside the house, Griffin stood motionless. On the television mounted in the living room, financial news anchors were practically shouting. Harborline Analytics closes its first hour of trading, up 248%. One of the strongest technology IPO debuts of the year. Early investors are seeing extraordinary gains. A photograph of Harborline's executive team appeared on the screen. Griffin stood in the back row. No smile, no expensive suit, just a navy blazer and a neutral expression. The anchors spent almost 10 minutes discussing Harborline. Not one of them mentioned Griffin's name. That was normal. Griffin had spent most of his adult life being overlooked. The company's charismatic CEO, Brandon Ellis, appeared regularly on CNBC. Investors loved him. Reporters loved him. Conference audiences loved him. Brandon could walk into a room and own it within 30 seconds. Griffin could spend 3 hours explaining a revolutionary logistics system and leave without anyone remembering his face. He preferred it that way. For 11 years, Harborline Analytics had consumed nearly every waking hour of his life. The company began in a rented warehouse near Seattle's industrial district. 3 folding tables, 4 computers, 1 leaking roof. Back then, Griffin wasn't worth hundreds of millions. He was worth negative $43,000. His student loans followed him everywhere. His credit cards were nearly maxed out, and during the first 2 years there were weeks when Harborline couldn't even afford proper office chairs. Griffin never complained. He simply worked. 18-hour days became normal. Weekends disappeared. Vacations became a distant memory. The software architecture that eventually made Harborline famous was largely his creation. While others pitched investors, Griffin built the engine. While others attended networking events, Griffin stayed in front of screens covered with code. The success investors celebrated today rested on systems Griffin had designed years earlier. Few people knew that. Even fewer appreciated it. Natalie certainly didn't. In the early years of their marriage, she admired Griffin's ambition. At least she said she did. When Harborline was struggling, she told friends she believed in him. When investors rejected proposal after proposal, she reassured him. When money became tight, she claimed they were a team. But success changes people. Sometimes failure does too. As Harborline grew, Natalie began comparing their life to others. A larger house, a newer car, luxury vacations, private clubs, friends who seemed wealthier, friends who looked wealthier. The distinction rarely mattered to her. Griffin continued driving the same Toyota Camry he had purchased 7 years earlier. Natalie hated that car. She mentioned it constantly. At dinner, at parties, during family gatherings. Sometimes she joked about it. Sometimes she didn't. One evening, nearly a year earlier, they had attended a fundraising event at a luxury hotel downtown. Most guests arrived in imported sports cars. Valets filled the entrance with Bentleys, Porsches, and Aston Martins. Griffin arrived in the Toyota. Natalie spent the entire ride home in silence. The next morning, she asked him a question. "Do you enjoy looking poor?" Griffin remembered the exact wording. He had simply looked at her, then returned to reading a report. The conversation ended there. That was usually how arguments ended. Griffin rarely fought, not because he was weak, because he saw little value in emotional battles. Facts mattered, evidence mattered, results mattered. Everything else tended to fade with time. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Harborline's executive legal team. Congratulations. Strong opening. Expect media requests. Call if needed. Griffin locked the screen. The message beside it caught his attention. It came from the law firm representing Natalie. The timestamp showed it had arrived nearly an hour earlier. Attached was a formal request for financial disclosures, asset inventories, investment accounts, property records, business interests. The list stretched for pages. Olivia Bennett would need to review it. Griffin made a mental note to call her later. Then something else caught his eye. A section detailing expenditures. The filing included several claims regarding shared marital finances. Most were ordinary: mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, travel expenses. Then he noticed a recurring charge, a monthly payment, always similar amounts, always appearing near the end of each month, always routed through accounts Natalie primarily managed. At first glance, it looked insignificant. A few $1,000s. Nothing unusual for their household income. But the recipient name stood out. Whitmore Strategic Advisors. Griffin frowned. He had never heard of it. The charge appeared again, and again, and again. 12 separate entries, spread across nearly a year. The total exceeded $40,000. Not enough to threaten him financially, more than enough to raise questions. He opened his laptop. Within seconds, he was searching public business records. Whitmore Strategic Advisors, Bellevue, Washington. Financial consulting. Registered owner, Derek Whitmore. Griffin stared at the screen. The name meant nothing. No immediate recognition. No memory. No connection. Yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. A second search revealed photographs, corporate profiles, conference appearances, investment seminars. Then Griffin noticed something. One photograph had been taken 6 months earlier at a charity gala in Bellevue. The image showed Derek Whitmore standing among several guests. Near him stood a woman in a black dress. Griffin leaned closer. Natalie. The photograph wasn't intimate, nothing inappropriate. Just two people standing near one another. But it triggered something. A memory, a conference, a canceled dinner. Several unexplained weekends, small details that had seemed meaningless at the time. The kind of details most people forget. Griffin rarely forgot details. He looked back toward the divorce papers on the counter, then at the screen, then back again. The television continued celebrating Harborline's historic debut. Reporters discussed growth projections. Analysts predicted even higher valuations. The world saw triumph. Griffin saw a pattern, and patterns mattered, because in Griffin's experience, major betrayals rarely began with dramatic moments. They began with small inconsistencies, tiny facts, tiny lies, tiny omissions. The first charge appeared 11 months earlier. The second appeared 10 months earlier. The third appeared shortly after Natalie started taking more solo trips. Griffin opened a spreadsheet, then another, then another. Numbers began lining up. Dates began matching. Pieces started connecting. By noon, one thing had become painfully clear. Natalie hadn't decided to leave recently. She had been preparing for a very long time. And somewhere inside those records, Griffin suspected there was a reason she had chosen today. Not yesterday. Not next month. Today. The day Harborline became a public company. The day Griffin Powell officially became one of Seattle's newest multimillionaires. As he continued tracing the transactions, one question remained unanswered. Who exactly was Derek Whitmore? And why had Natalie been sending him money for almost a year? Griffin Powell did not sleep much that night. Not because of the divorce papers. Not even because Harborline Analytics had added an amount of wealth to his name that would have seemed absurd a week earlier. It was the pattern. The more Griffin examined the numbers, the less they looked random. And Griffin trusted patterns. By 6 o'clock the next morning, Seattle's sky was covered by a blanket of gray clouds. Rain tapped softly against the windows of his home. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table. A spreadsheet filled the screen. Dates, transactions, business registrations, hotel reservations, conference schedules. Most people would have seen unrelated pieces of information. Griffin saw a timeline. The payments to Whitmore Strategic Advisors began 11 months earlier. At first they were small, $2,000, then $3,000, then larger amounts. Each payment appeared shortly after one specific event: Natalie's so-called business trips, girls' weekends, charity functions, networking dinners, excuses he had never questioned, not because he was naive, because trust had never required surveillance. Until now. Griffin leaned back in his chair and studied the corporate profile of Derek Whitmore. 44 years old, investment strategist, graduate of the University of Washington, former wealth management executive, divorced, based in Bellevue. Professional photographs covered multiple financial websites. Derek knew how to present himself. Expensive suits, perfect smile, private club memberships, luxury conferences. The type of man Natalie often admired, the type of man she frequently compared Griffin against. Several comments she had made over the years suddenly returned to him. Derek's clients all travel first class. Derek understands how successful people live. Derek says technology executives often make terrible financial decisions. At the time, Griffin barely paid attention. Now every sentence felt different. His phone rang. Olivia Bennett. Griffin answered immediately. "Morning," Olivia said. "Morning. I reviewed the filing." "What do you think?" A brief pause. "I think your wife didn't pick yesterday by accident." Griffin looked toward the television. Financial analysts were still discussing Harborline's extraordinary IPO. The stock had risen again after market open. The valuation was becoming national news. Olivia continued. "How much attention is Harborline getting?" "A lot." "Then I can tell you exactly why she filed now." Griffin already suspected the answer. Olivia confirmed it. "She believes most of your wealth became marital property the moment the company went public." Griffin remained silent. "Whether she's correct is a different conversation," Olivia said. "But that's clearly the strategy." "The timing." "Exactly." Griffin stared at the spreadsheets. The timing. Not the marriage. Not the relationship. Not the betrayal. The money. That appeared to be the priority. Olivia spoke again. "I need every financial record from the last 3 years." "You'll have them today." "And Griffin." "Yes." "Don't contact her." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Olivia sounded relieved. "People make mistakes when they're emotional." Griffin looked at the divorce papers lying beside his laptop. "I've had 24 hours. And I think I'm past emotional." Olivia laughed quietly. "No, you're entering the dangerous stage." "What stage is that?" "The analytical stage." After ending the call, Griffin spent another hour reviewing documents. Then he noticed something unexpected. One of Derek Whitmore's recent conference appearances had been held at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle. The event date immediately stood out. Natalie had attended that event, at least according to her calendar. She had told Griffin it was a charity fundraiser. A photograph gallery from the event remained online. Griffin opened it. Hundreds of images, executives, investors, sponsors, guests. He clicked through them one by one, then stopped. There she was. Natalie, standing beside Derek. Closer than before. Not enough to prove anything. Enough to raise questions. Griffin continued scrolling. Another image, then another, then another. Each photograph narrowed the distance between them. Shared conversations, private smiles, familiar body language. Nothing dramatic, nothing undeniable, but no longer innocent. By lunchtime, Griffin had assembled a folder containing nearly 50 separate pieces of information. Individually, they meant little. Together, they told a story. The story became clearer when he examined travel records. Natalie had supposedly attended 3 separate events in San Francisco over the previous year. Derek had attended those same events, the same hotels, the same dates, the same conference schedules. Coincidences existed, but Griffin had spent 11 years building systems designed to detect anomalies. The probability of this many coincidences occurring naturally was extremely small. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Natalie, the first direct communication since the filing. The message contained only one sentence: "Please keep this civil." Griffin read it twice, then set the phone down. No anger, no response, just observation. Civil. An interesting word, especially after arranging a divorce filing on the single most financially significant day of his life, especially after apparently planning it for months, especially after involving someone named Derek Whitmore. Griffin closed the message, then returned to work. 3 hours later, another breakthrough arrived. A public records search revealed the official registration date of Whitmore Strategic Advisors. The company had been established almost exactly 1 year earlier. The timing aligned perfectly with the first payment Natalie made. That alone was suspicious. What caught Griffin's attention even more was the listed mailing address. He recognized it immediately. A luxury office building in Bellevue. Not because he had visited, because Harborline leased conference space there several times each year. The realization landed quietly. Derek had operated less than 20 miles away from Griffin's workplace the entire time. Close enough to know things, close enough to learn things, close enough to become interested in Harborline's future. And Harborline's future was suddenly worth billions. That thought triggered another possibility, one Griffin didn't like. What if Derek's interest wasn't limited to Natalie? What if Harborline itself was part of the attraction? The question lingered. Hours later, Griffin drove into downtown Seattle, not to confront anyone, not to investigate, to meet Olivia Bennett. Her office occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. Olivia reviewed several documents while Griffin sat across from her. Eventually, she removed her glasses. "You were right." "About what?" "Whitmore." She slid a file across the desk. Inside was additional information her investigators had gathered. Professional history, business affiliations, financial disclosures. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious. Yet one detail immediately stood out. Derek specialized in high-net-worth divorce planning. Griffin looked up. Olivia nodded. "He advises clients during major divorces." The room fell silent. Everything suddenly felt more deliberate, more organized, more calculated. Natalie hadn't randomly met Derek. Derek hadn't accidentally appeared. The relationship now seemed connected to a larger strategy, a strategy that may have existed long before the divorce papers arrived. Olivia folded her hands. "I think there's something else." "What?" She opened another folder. Inside sat an old document. Several signatures appeared across the final page. Griffin recognized it instantly. He had not seen it in years. Olivia tapped one signature, Natalie's. Then she looked directly at him. "I think your wife forgot this exists." Griffin studied the document, and for the first time since the divorce began, he saw the possibility that Natalie and Derek had made a very expensive mistake. The document looked ordinary. No dramatic title, no bold warnings, no language that would have stood out to anyone flipping through a stack of legal paperwork. Yet the moment Griffin Powell saw it, he remembered exactly where it came from. 6 years earlier, back when Harborline Analytics was fighting to survive, back when nobody believed the company would become anything special, back when Griffin's future looked far more uncertain than promising. Olivia Bennett slid the document across her desk. "Tell me what you remember." Griffin picked it up carefully. Outside the office windows, Seattle's waterfront disappeared beneath a curtain of rain. For a moment, he was no longer sitting in Olivia's conference room. He was standing inside a much smaller office 6 years earlier. A different life. A different version of Harborline. Back then, the company occupied part of a converted warehouse south of downtown Seattle. The building smelled faintly of concrete dust and machine oil. Half the lights flickered. The heating system barely worked. Several employees wore jackets indoors during winter. Harborline had been burning cash for months. Investors were growing impatient. Competition was increasing. And Griffin carried stress like a permanent weight on his shoulders. Every payroll cycle felt like a battle. Every quarterly report felt like a judgment. Every investor meeting felt like an examination. Natalie hated that period. She rarely said it directly. But Griffin saw it. The anxiety, the frustration, the embarrassment. Many of her friends were marrying surgeons, attorneys, and executives with stable careers. Natalie had married a man betting everything on a technology startup that might fail. One evening she arrived home visibly upset. A dinner party had gone badly. One of her friends had spent most of the evening discussing vacation homes in Aspen. Another had shown photographs from a yacht trip in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, Griffin and Natalie were still carefully tracking expenses, still discussing budgets, still postponing major purchases. That night, Natalie sat across from Griffin at the kitchen table. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply placed a folder in front of him. "What is this?" Griffin asked. "A postnuptial agreement." Griffin remembered the exact moment. The kitchen light above them, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the exhaustion in Natalie's voice. She explained her reasoning calmly. If Harborline failed, she didn't want future creditors pursuing assets connected to her. If the company collapsed, she wanted protection. If lawsuits appeared, she wanted separation. The request wasn't unreasonable. In fact, several advisors had recommended similar precautions. Griffin read every page, then looked at Natalie. "Are you sure? I need peace of mind. You understand what this means?" Yes. He wasn't entirely convinced she did, but Natalie insisted, again and again. She wanted it signed. She wanted it completed. She wanted the matter resolved. So Griffin hired independent counsel. Natalie hired independent counsel. The process took months. Lawyers reviewed language. Accountants reviewed disclosures. Additional clauses were added. Nothing happened quickly. Everything was documented. Everything was formal. Everything was legal. That detail would become important later. Eventually, the final version was completed. The agreement contained several major provisions. Most were routine. One wasn't. Any ownership interest connected to Harborline Analytics remained separate property. Any appreciation in value remained separate property. Any future increase in valuation remained separate property. Any intellectual property created through Harborline remained separate property. The language was remarkably comprehensive. At the time, the company was worth very little. Natalie barely paid attention to those sections. Her focus rested elsewhere. Protection, security, risk reduction. She signed. The agreement was notarized, witnessed, filed, stored, and forgotten. At least by Natalie. Griffin never forgot it existed. He simply never expected to need it. The memory faded as Griffin returned to the present. Olivia watched him carefully. "You remember now? Every detail. Good." Griffin looked down at the signature page. Natalie's signature appeared near the bottom. Neat, clear, undisputed. Olivia opened another folder, then another, then another. The collection of supporting documentation seemed endless. "She had her own attorney," Olivia said. "I remember. We have the billing records." Griffin nodded. "We have the consultation notes." Another nod. "We have the disclosures." And Olivia leaned back. "And she has almost no path to challenge this." The statement hung in the room. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, Griffin felt something shift. Not relief, not satisfaction, certainty. Facts were beginning to align. That mattered, because facts couldn't be manipulated as easily as emotions. Olivia continued reviewing documents. "There's more." Griffin waited. "Her filing assumes a significant portion of Harborline's IPO gains became marital property. And this agreement directly contradicts that assumption." The implications were obvious. If the agreement held up, the foundation of Natalie's strategy collapsed. Not entirely. There would still be assets to divide. Their home, joint savings, retirement accounts accumulated during the marriage, other property. But Harborline represented the overwhelming majority of Griffin's wealth. Without Harborline stock, the divorce looked very different. Olivia closed the file. I suspect Derek never saw this. That possibility interested Griffin, because if Derek specialized in divorce strategy, he should have discovered it, unless Natalie never mentioned it, or perhaps she genuinely forgot. Both possibilities seemed plausible. People often ignored documents they believed would never matter. Then reality changed, and suddenly forgotten details became extremely important. A notification appeared on Griffin's phone. Market update. Harborline stock had surged again. He opened the alert. The number remained almost surreal. The company had gained billions in market capitalization within 2 trading sessions. Analysts were now calling Harborline one of the year's most successful public offerings. Financial media couldn't stop discussing it. Investors couldn't stop buying it. The valuation continued climbing. Griffin stared at the screen for several seconds. 6 years ago, the company had nearly died. Today, it dominated financial headlines. The contrast felt unreal. Another notification arrived, then another. Messages from former colleagues, former investors, former employees. Congratulations, amazing achievement, well-deserved, huge moment. Griffin appreciated the messages, yet none of them felt particularly important right now, because another realization had begun forming. Natalie hadn't filed for divorce when Harborline struggled. She hadn't filed when uncertainty existed. She hadn't filed when the company faced risk. She waited until success became visible, until value became measurable, until Wall Street validated what Griffin had spent 11 years building. Only then did the divorce papers appear. The timing said more than words ever could. Olivia interrupted his thoughts. When's the first hearing? 3 weeks. Good. She sounded confident. That gives us time. Time for what? Preparation. Griffin almost smiled. Preparation was a language he understood. Build carefully. Test everything. Verify assumptions. Document facts. The same principles that created Harborline would now guide the divorce. No emotional speeches. No dramatic confrontations. No revenge. Just evidence. Olivia gathered the files into neat stacks. Then she handed Griffin a copy of the agreement. Keep this. He slipped it into his briefcase. As he stood to leave, Olivia added one final thought. I expect Natalie will become more aggressive once she realizes what this document means. Griffin paused. You think she knows yet? No. Olivia's answer came instantly. I think she believes this is going according to plan. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Clouds drifted slowly above Elliott Bay. For the first time in days, sunlight pushed through the gray sky. Griffin walked toward the parking garage. His phone vibrated once more. This time, the alert came from Harborline's Investor Relations Department. The stock had finished another remarkable trading day. More headlines, more interviews, more attention, more money, far more money. And somewhere in Seattle, Natalie Powell was probably celebrating her timing. What she didn't know was that a document she signed 6 years earlier had just become the most expensive signature of her life. 3 weeks later, Griffin Powell walked into the King County Superior Court building, carrying a single leather briefcase. The morning air was cold. Seattle rain had left the sidewalks slick and reflective. News about Harborline Analytics still appeared regularly on financial channels. The stock continued, attracting attention. Analysts debated whether the company could maintain its extraordinary growth. None of that mattered today. Today was about facts. The courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet conversations. Attorneys moved between elevators. Families sat on wooden benches. Court officers guided visitors through security checkpoints. To most people inside the building, this was just another Wednesday. To Natalie Powell, it was supposed to be the beginning of a financial victory. At least that was how it appeared. Griffin spotted her before she saw him. She stood near a window overlooking 4th Avenue, perfectly styled, perfectly composed. Everything about her appearance seemed carefully planned. The cream-colored designer suit, the expensive handbag, the jewelry, the confidence. Standing beside her was Derek Whitmore, the first time Griffin had ever seen him in person. Derek looked exactly like his photographs. Expensive watch, tailored suit, polished smile, the kind of man who appeared comfortable in every room. Natalie said something. Derek laughed. Neither seemed concerned. Neither seemed nervous. Griffin watched for a moment, then continued toward the courtroom without changing expression. He wasn't interested in confrontations. Not here. Not now. Olivia Bennett was already waiting. She occupied a seat near the front. Several organized folders rested beside her. She looked up as Griffin approached. "Morning? Morning. You ready?" Griffin nodded. Olivia studied him briefly. "You look calmer than I expected." "I've had 3 weeks." That answer earned a faint smile. "Good." The courtroom doors opened shortly afterward. Everyone entered. The room itself was smaller than most people imagined when they thought about major legal proceedings. No dramatic architecture, no television-style theatrics, just wooden benches, neutral walls, a raised bench for the judge, a place where facts would eventually matter more than emotions. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered precisely on time. Everyone stood, then sat. The proceedings began. The first several minutes focused on procedural matters, case numbers, schedules, administrative details. Nothing dramatic, nothing unexpected. Then the discussion shifted toward assets. That was when the atmosphere changed. Natalie's attorney rose first. A sharp, confident woman named Linda Carver. She wasted no time. "Your Honor, the petitioner seeks equitable division of marital assets, including substantial appreciation, connected to Harborline Analytics." The statement sounded simple, but everyone in the room understood what it meant. Money. A tremendous amount of money. Judge Whitaker nodded. "Continue." Linda proceeded carefully. She described the marriage, the years spent together, the company's growth during the marriage, the timing of the IPO, the dramatic increase in value. Every argument pointed toward the same conclusion. Natalie deserved a significant share. As Linda spoke, Griffin remained still. His attention focused entirely on facts. Not accusations, not implications. Facts. The judge eventually turned toward Olivia. "Ms. Bennett." Olivia stood. Unlike Linda, she spoke quietly. No performance, no theatrics, just confidence. "Your Honor, before discussing valuation issues, there is a threshold matter requiring review." She lifted a folder. Natalie's attorney immediately stiffened. Olivia continued. "Specifically, a postnuptial agreement executed 6 years ago." For the first time all morning, Griffin noticed a subtle change in Natalie's expression. Not panic. Not yet. But surprise. Small, brief, real. Linda responded quickly. "We are aware of the document." Olivia nodded. "Excellent." Then she handed copies to the court. One copy to opposing counsel, one to the judge, one to the clerk. The courtroom became quiet. Judge Whitaker began reading. Page after page. The silence stretched. Several minutes passed. No one interrupted. No one spoke. The judge turned another page, then another, then finally stopped. Her eyes settled on the signature section. The courtroom remained completely still. Natalie shifted slightly in her chair. Derek glanced toward her. Neither looked quite as comfortable as before. Judge Whitaker looked up. "Was independent counsel provided for both parties?" "Yes, Your Honor," Olivia answered. "Documentation. Included in Exhibit B." The judge reviewed it, then continued reading. "Full financial disclosure. Exhibit C." Another review. Another pause. "Notarized. Exhibit D." The judge examined each document carefully. Griffin appreciated that. Rushed decisions created mistakes. Thorough reviews created clarity. Several more minutes passed. Then Linda Carver stood again. "Your Honor, we reserve the right to challenge enforceability." Judge Whitaker nodded. "On what basis?" Linda hesitated, only briefly, then answered. "Potential coercion." Griffin almost looked away, almost, because the argument felt strange. 6 years earlier, Natalie had been the one demanding the agreement. The memory remained vivid. She initiated it. She insisted on it. She accelerated the process. Olivia appeared unsurprised. Clearly, she expected the challenge. "Your Honor," Olivia said, "we anticipated that possibility." She opened another folder, then another. The amount of preparation became obvious. Email records, attorney correspondence, consultation notes, scheduling records, invoices, everything carefully organized, everything documented. Olivia selected one document, then handed it to the court. Judge Whitaker reviewed it. Her expression changed slightly. "What is this?" Olivia answered immediately. "An email sent by Mrs. Powell." Natalie sat straighter. The judge continued reading. The email had been written 6 years earlier. Its contents were straightforward. Natalie requested stronger language, protecting her from Harborline-related liabilities. Natalie requested additional separation provisions. Natalie requested faster completion of the agreement. Natalie, not Griffin. Natalie's attorney immediately reviewed the same document. The confidence visible earlier began fading. Judge Whitaker placed the email beside the agreement, then reviewed another, and another. A pattern emerged. Every record pointed in the same direction. Natalie wanted the agreement. Natalie pushed for the agreement. Natalie signed the agreement, voluntarily, knowingly, with legal representation. The silence inside the courtroom deepened. Even Derek appeared uncomfortable now. For the first time since arriving, he stopped looking confident. He looked concerned. The judge finally set the documents aside, then folded her hands. "The court finds no immediate basis to disregard this agreement." The statement landed heavily. Linda Carver attempted another argument. Judge Whitaker listened, patiently, professionally, then interrupted. "I said immediate basis." The distinction mattered. Challenges could still be raised later, but for now the agreement remained in force. And that changed everything. Natalie's entire strategy depended upon access to Harborline's value. Without that assumption, the landscape shifted dramatically. The judge continued. "Accordingly, the request for immediate restrictions regarding Harborline equity is denied pending further review." The words were simple. Their impact wasn't. Olivia made a note. Griffin remained silent. Natalie stared toward the judge. Derek stared toward the table. Neither spoke. Neither smiled. The hearing continued for another 30 minutes. Schedules were established. Future discovery deadlines were assigned. Additional financial disclosures were ordered. Eventually, the session ended. People began gathering documents. Conversations resumed. Chairs moved. The atmosphere changed from tension to movement. As Griffin collected his briefcase, he noticed Natalie speaking quietly to Derek. Their expressions looked different now, less confident, more urgent. The hearing hadn't ended the case, far from it, but something important had happened. Reality had entered the room, and reality often disrupted carefully constructed plans. Olivia closed her folders. "Good first day." Griffin nodded. "Very." "You see their faces." "I did." Olivia smiled slightly. "They weren't expecting that." "No." They walked toward the courtroom exit. As they reached the hallway, Griffin glanced back one final time. Natalie leaned toward Derek. Their voices remained too low to hear clearly. Almost. Then a fragment reached him. Just 2 words, spoken quickly, spoken urgently. "Plan B." Griffin kept walking, but the words stayed with him, because people only needed a second plan when the first one had failed. The phrase stayed with Griffin Powell during the drive home. Plan B. 2 simple words. Yet they explained more than Natalie or Derek probably realized. People only prepared alternative strategies when the original strategy mattered. And judging by their reaction inside the courtroom, the original strategy had suffered a serious setback. Rain streaked across Griffin's windshield as he crossed the Interstate 90 bridge toward Mercer Island. Seattle traffic crawled. Headlights reflected against wet pavement. Normally, Griffin used long drives to think about Harborline, product development, infrastructure, hiring, market expansion. Today, his thoughts remained fixed on the divorce, not because of emotion, because of logic. Natalie had entered the first hearing expecting leverage. She left without it. That changed incentives. And when incentives changed, behavior changed. Griffin had learned that lesson years earlier while building Harborline. People revealed themselves most clearly when circumstances shifted unexpectedly. The next morning confirmed his suspicion. At 7:12 a.m., Olivia Bennett called. "Good morning?" "Morning?" "You were right." Griffin frowned. "About what?" "Plan B." Olivia sounded less amused than before, more serious, more focused. "What happened?" "A local financial blog published an article overnight." Griffin already suspected where this was heading. "What kind of article?" Olivia sighed. "The kind designed to create headlines." She forwarded the link. Seconds later, Griffin opened it. The title appeared immediately. Questions surround Harborline executive during billion-dollar IPO. The article itself avoided direct accusations. That was intentional. Experienced people rarely made accusations they couldn't prove. Instead, the author used implication. Questions, suggestions, speculation. The article hinted that Griffin might have hidden assets. It questioned financial transparency. It suggested that ongoing divorce proceedings could reveal undisclosed information. Nothing concrete, nothing verifiable. Yet the purpose was obvious. Create doubt, generate attention, pressure Griffin, pressure Harborline, pressure investors, pressure everyone. Griffin read the entire article twice, then closed it. "Interesting." Olivia laughed. "That's your reaction." "What reaction should I have?" "Most people would be furious." Griffin stared out the kitchen window. Clouds drifted across the Seattle skyline. "Being furious wouldn't change anything." "No, it never does." Olivia sounded pleased. "Good, because this is probably just the beginning." Unfortunately, she was right. By noon, several smaller websites had repeated the story. By afternoon, social media discussions began spreading. Most comments were meaningless. People guessing, people assuming, people inventing narratives. That was the internet. But some investors paid attention, and investors influenced markets. By the closing bell, Harborline stock had fallen almost 9%. Not catastrophic, not devastating, but noticeable. The company's legal department immediately scheduled an emergency meeting. 3 hours later, Griffin sat inside Harborline headquarters overlooking Elliott Bay. The atmosphere differed dramatically from the celebration that followed the IPO. Executives looked concerned. Board members looked irritated. Investor relations staff looked exhausted. A giant screen displayed media coverage. Most remained positive. A handful did not. CEO Brandon Ellis stood near the front of the room. "Let's address the obvious." Nobody disagreed. Brandon turned toward Griffin. "You okay?" "Fine." "You want to explain what's happening?" Griffin nodded, then calmly summarized the situation. The divorce, the timing, the postnuptial agreement, the court hearing, the media article, the facts. Nothing more, nothing less. Questions followed. Direct questions. Difficult questions. Could this become larger? Could regulators become interested? Could additional allegations emerge? Could investors lose confidence? Griffin answered each one. Carefully, accurately, without speculation. Eventually, the company's general counsel spoke. Her name was Rebecca Chang. She had spent nearly 20 years handling corporate legal matters. People listened when she spoke. "What documentation do we have?" Griffin slid a folder across the table. Rebecca reviewed it. Then another. Then another. The room became quiet. After 15 minutes, she closed the final folder. "Everything appears documented." "Because it is." She nodded. "I don't see evidence of hidden assets." "There isn't any?" "Good." Several board members visibly relaxed. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. The existence of records mattered. By the end of the meeting, Harborline's leadership reached a unanimous conclusion. Full cooperation, full transparency. No panic, no emotional responses, no public attacks, just facts. The same approach Griffin preferred. As the meeting ended, Rebecca stopped him. "One more thing." "What?" She handed him a separate report. "This came from compliance." Griffin opened it. Several pages detailed unusual trading activity occurring shortly before Harborline's IPO. At first glance, it seemed routine. Thousands of trades happened every day. Most meant nothing. Then Rebecca pointed toward a highlighted section. "This account." Griffin studied the information. The account had purchased a significant number of Harborline call options shortly before public trading began. A very aggressive position. A very profitable position. The timing stood out. The profit stood out even more. "Why am I looking at this?" Rebecca folded her arms. "Because compliance thinks the account may be connected to someone you know." Griffin's expression remained neutral. "Who?" Rebecca slid another page forward. The name appeared immediately. Whitmore Capital Holdings. Griffin stared at the page. Derek Whitmore. Not directly, not personally, but close enough. A company connected to him. A company associated with him. A company that somehow placed remarkably successful bets shortly before Harborline's public debut. The room suddenly felt smaller. Rebecca continued. "We aren't making accusations." "Understood. But the timing is unusual." Griffin agreed. Very unusual, especially considering what he already knew. Natalie's relationship with Derek, the divorce filing, the media campaign, the financial strategy. Now this. Another piece of the puzzle. Not proof, not yet, but another piece. That evening, Griffin met Olivia Bennett again. This time, she reviewed both developments. The media attack, the trading activity. Her reaction remained measured, yet Griffin noticed something. She was becoming increasingly interested in Derek, not Natalie. Derek. "Why him?" Griffin asked. Olivia organized several documents. "Because patterns matter." Griffin almost smiled. She sounded exactly like him. Olivia continued. "Your wife wanted money." "Yes." "That's predictable." She tapped the Whitmore trading report. "This is less predictable." Griffin understood immediately. If Derek possessed non-public information regarding Harborline's future performance, the implications became serious. Potentially very serious. Olivia leaned forward. "Let's assume for a moment he knew Harborline would perform well." "Okay. How would he know?" A reasonable question. One Griffin couldn't answer. At least not yet. Olivia continued. "Then let's assume he believed the divorce could create leverage." Another reasonable assumption. "Okay. And let's assume he encouraged that strategy." Griffin remained silent. The picture was becoming clearer. Not complete, but clearer. Natalie may have believed she was pursuing a divorce. Derek may have viewed the situation differently. An opportunity, a transaction, a financial event, something to be managed, something to profit from. The possibility disturbed Griffin more than he expected. Not because it hurt, because it fit. Late that night, after returning home, Griffin reviewed old records again. Emails, calendars, financial disclosures, travel schedules. One detail finally caught his attention. A luxury hotel reservation, Bellevue, 9 months earlier. The reservation itself wasn't important. The guest list was Natalie, Derek, and a third individual, someone Griffin didn't recognize. He wrote down the name, then searched it. The result appeared almost instantly. A licensed securities broker. Griffin stared at the screen. The puzzle was expanding, and each new piece seemed to lead towards something larger than a divorce. Much larger. His phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. Just one sentence. "I think Derek may have a bigger problem than family court." Griffin read it twice, then looked again at the trading report. For the first time since the divorce began, he wondered whether Derek's greatest concern wasn't losing a legal argument. It might be explaining how he knew exactly where Harborline's stock was headed before the rest of the market did. The second attack arrived 4 days later. This time, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden behind careful wording or vague implications. Someone wanted damage, real damage. Griffin discovered it while walking into Harborline headquarters shortly before 7 in the morning. The lobby television displayed a financial news segment. A headline stretched across the bottom of the screen. Questions continue surrounding Harborline executives' personal finances. Several employees noticed it. They tried not to stare. Most failed. Griffin simply continued toward the elevator. His badge beeped. The doors opened. The workday began. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Internally, everything had. The previous article had appeared on a minor financial blog. Now larger outlets were repeating portions of the story, not because they possessed evidence, because controversy generated traffic. Traffic generated revenue. Facts often arrived later, if they arrived at all. By 8 o'clock, Griffin's inbox contained more than 50 media inquiries. Most asked identical questions. Had he hidden assets? Were there undisclosed financial interests? Was Harborline vulnerable to future revelations? The accusations remained vague. The intent remained obvious. Pressure. Pressure on Griffin. Pressure on Harborline. Pressure on investors. Pressure on the board. A strategy designed to create panic. Griffin forwarded everything to the legal department. Then he opened his calendar and started working. Software infrastructure reviews. International expansion planning. Engineering budget discussions. The same work he had performed for years, because distractions only succeeded when people allowed them to. At 10:14 a.m., his assistant appeared at the office door. "Board meeting." Griffin nodded. The emergency session began 10 minutes later. Unlike the previous meeting, the atmosphere felt heavier. The stock price appeared on a large screen, down another 6%. Not catastrophic, not yet, but enough to attract attention. CEO Brandon Ellis stood near the front. "We need updates." Rebecca Chang handled most of the presentation. She outlined ongoing media coverage, investor concerns, legal exposure, market reactions. Then she reached the most important conclusion. "We have found no evidence supporting any allegation against Mr. Powell." The room remained quiet. Several board members exchanged looks. One finally spoke. "What if more accusations appear?" Rebecca answered immediately. "Then we address them. Publicly? When appropriate." Another board member leaned forward. "Can we prove transparency?" Rebecca almost smiled. "Absolutely." She looked toward Griffin. "Possibly more thoroughly than any executive I've ever worked with." That statement mattered, because it was true. Griffin documented everything, always had. Years earlier, when Harborline struggled financially, he developed a habit. Every investment, every transfer, every major purchase, every tax document, every ownership record, everything was stored, everything was organized, everything was traceable. The habit came from his father, Harold Powell, a retired aircraft mechanic from Tacoma. Harold often repeated the same phrase during Griffin's childhood. "If it's important, write it down." Griffin listened. Most people didn't. Now that habit was protecting him. The board meeting ended with a clear decision. Continue operations. Remain transparent. Avoid emotional responses. Let facts speak. Again, the same strategy. The correct strategy. After the meeting, Rebecca stopped Griffin outside the conference room. "Got a minute?" "Sure." She handed him another compliance report. This one looked thicker, much thicker. "We dug deeper." "Into Whitmore?" Rebecca nodded. "Partly." Griffin opened the report. Several pages detailed unusual option activities surrounding Harborline's IPO. The patterns were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Certain accounts purchased aggressive positions shortly before public trading began. Several generated extraordinary profits. One account appeared repeatedly. "Whitmore Capital Holdings." Again. Rebecca folded her arms. "We also found something else." "What?" She pointed to another page. The name looked familiar. The same securities broker Griffin discovered days earlier. The third individual from the Bellevue hotel reservation. Now his name appeared within the compliance report, connected indirectly to multiple transactions, connected indirectly to Derek Whitmore, connected indirectly to Harborline trading activity. Not proof, but another connection, another coincidence, another piece. Griffin studied the pages silently. Eventually, Rebecca asked a question. You believe in coincidences? Sometimes. How many? That was the problem. One coincidence happened. 2 coincidences happened. 10 coincidences formed a pattern, and Griffin had already counted more than 10. That evening, Olivia Bennett received the same information. Her reaction was immediate. We need discovery. Griffin sat across from her office desk. Specifically, everything. Olivia began listing items: communications, financial records, bank transfers, travel expenses, electronic devices, calendar data, messaging applications, cloud storage, anything connected to Natalie and Derek. Griffin listened. The strategy made sense, because once accusations entered court proceedings, evidence became fair game. And evidence didn't care about narratives. Evidence only cared about truth. Olivia opened a legal pad. We're filing requests tomorrow. You think they'll fight it? Absolutely. Why? She looked up. Because people only resist discovery when they're worried about what discovery might find. The answer felt obvious, yet important. The next hearing remained weeks away, but the battle had already shifted. The first phase involved Harborline stock. The second phase involved reputation. Now a third phase was emerging. Documentation, records, evidence. A battlefield Griffin understood far better than public drama. 3 days later, another development arrived. This one surprised even Olivia. A private investigator working for her firm discovered the source of the original financial blog article. Not publicly, privately. The trail led through marketing consultants, public relations contractors, third-party media contacts. Eventually, it reached a consulting agreement. The client name had been redacted. The payment source hadn't. Whitmore Strategic Advisors, Derek again. The revelation didn't prove misconduct, but it revealed intent. Someone was actively feeding the story. Someone wanted headlines. Someone wanted pressure. Someone wanted leverage. Olivia reviewed the report twice, then a third time. Finally, she leaned back. This isn't a divorce strategy anymore. Griffin agreed. The situation felt different now. Larger, more coordinated, more deliberate. Natalie may have started the process believing she was pursuing a favorable settlement. Derek appeared to be pursuing something else entirely. Control, influence, financial gain. Maybe all three. Late Friday afternoon, Harborline stock stabilized. Investors responded positively to the company's transparency. The decline stopped, then reversed. A modest gain appeared before market close. Nothing dramatic, but significant, because confidence was returning. Facts were beginning to win. That same evening, Griffin received a message from an unfamiliar number. No greeting, no signature, only a single sentence. You should settle before things get worse. Griffin stared at the screen, then forwarded it directly to Olivia. 10 minutes later, she called. Don't respond. I wasn't planning to. Good. Her voice sounded unusually sharp. Save everything. I already did. Of course you did. A brief silence followed. Then Olivia spoke again. This is getting sloppy. What is the pressure campaign? She sounded almost disappointed. As soon as people start sending messages like that, they're losing control. Griffin understood, because organized plans usually looked professional. Desperation looked different. The message felt desperate. The media campaign felt desperate. The timing felt desperate. And desperation often created mistakes. Mistakes created evidence. Evidence created consequences. Around midnight, Griffin sat alone in his home office reviewing the latest documents. The room was silent. Only the glow of the monitor illuminated the desk. He opened another spreadsheet, then another, then another. Eventually, one transaction caught his attention. Small, Easy to miss. A payment made 9 weeks before the IPO, originating from an account connected to Derek. Destination unknown. The amount wasn't extraordinary. The timing was. Griffin highlighted the entry, then cross-referenced another document. His eyes narrowed. The payment occurred less than 24 hours before Harborline's confidential valuation update. Information only a limited number of people should have known. A coincidence? Maybe. Another coincidence. Again. The list kept growing. His phone vibrated. A message from Olivia arrived. Just 4 words. Found something interesting. Griffin immediately called. Olivia answered on the first ring. What happened? Her response came quietly, carefully, almost thoughtfully. I think Derek wasn't just betting on the divorce. A pause followed. Then she delivered the sentence Griffin had been expecting for days. I think he was betting on Harborline. The next phase began with paperwork. Not dramatic confrontations, not secret recordings, not surprise witnesses. Paperwork. Griffin Powell would have appreciated the irony. For weeks, Natalie and Derek appeared to believe they could shape the story through timing pressure and publicity. Now they were about to discover what happened when lawyers started asking for documents. Lots of documents. Olivia Bennett filed the discovery requests on a Monday morning. The list was extensive. Bank statements, credit card records, travel expenses, email communications, text messages, business records, hotel receipts, calendar entries, electronic device backups, cloud storage accounts. The request targeted information connected to both Natalie and Derek. Nothing unreasonable, nothing improper, just evidence. The court approved the requests, and suddenly the pressure shifted. For the first time since the divorce began, Natalie wasn't demanding information. She was being required to provide it. Griffin noticed the difference immediately. Olivia noticed it too. They're stalling. The comment came during a meeting inside her office overlooking Elliott Bay. What makes you think that? Griffin asked. Extension requests. She handed him several documents, multiple objections. Another stack followed. Delayed responses. Then another. Partial disclosures. Griffin looked through everything. The pattern was obvious. Delay, 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 delay again. Olivia folded her arms. People don't usually fight disclosure this aggressively unless disclosure scares them. The observation felt accurate. Over the following weeks, information arrived slowly, often reluctantly. Each new document answered one question and raised 2 more. The hotel records came first. Several matched travel dates Griffin already suspected. San Francisco, Chicago, Las Vegas, Austin, business conferences, industry events, financial seminars. According to the records, Natalie and Derek appeared at many of the same locations, again and again and again. Not proof of an affair by itself, but enough to eliminate coincidence. Then came restaurant receipts, luxury hotels, private transportation services, entertainment expenses. Most payments originated through accounts connected to Derek. Others flowed through Natalie. A pattern of shared activity emerged. A timeline began taking shape. Griffin reviewed everything carefully, without emotion, without commentary. The facts spoke loudly enough on their own. One Friday afternoon, Olivia called. You need to see this. Griffin arrived 30 minutes later. A large conference table sat covered with documents. Highlighted notes filled the margins. Several investigators from Olivia's firm were present. The atmosphere felt different, focused, intense, promising. Olivia pointed toward a section of records. Start here. Griffin sat down. The first document appeared ordinary. A hotel invoice, then another, and another. Eventually he noticed the connection. Dates, specific dates. Every major meeting between Natalie and Derek occurred shortly before significant Harborline milestones. Investor presentations, valuation reviews, private funding rounds, IPO preparation meetings. The timing was impossible to ignore. Griffin looked up. You think she was talking about Harborline? Olivia answered carefully. I think Harborline came up often. That was enough. because Natalie possessed access to certain information, not confidential documents, not corporate systems, but proximity, conversations, schedules, observations, details people casually discussed at home, the kind of information that seemed harmless until someone connected the pieces. One investigator slid another folder across the table. This one contained electronic communication records, not message content. Metadata, dates, times, durations, patterns, thousands of interactions, calls between Natalie and Derek, messages, late-night conversations, weekend communications, holiday communications. The frequency alone was remarkable. Then Griffin noticed something. The communication volume increased dramatically during Harborline's IPO preparation period, exactly when the company's value began accelerating, exactly when insider information became most valuable. Again, maybe coincidence, another coincidence, another pattern. The list continued growing. Several days later, Olivia received court approval for device inspections. Natalie's attorney fought aggressively. The objections failed. A forensic review was ordered. The moment Olivia informed Griffin, he recognized its significance. Digital devices remembered things people forgot. Deleted messages, stored drafts, location history, cloud synchronization, fragments, tiny fragments. Enough fragments often revealed the truth. The first forensic report arrived 12 days later. It wasn't explosive, not yet, but it contained something important. A series of exported files, financial projections, market articles, Harborline research reports, IPO analysis, documents Natalie had downloaded repeatedly. Some originated from public sources, others were less clear. Olivia reviewed everything, then highlighted several entries. These concern me. Griffin examined the timestamps. Many downloads occurred immediately before meetings with Derek. The pattern appeared again. Research, meeting, research, meeting, research, meeting. The sequence repeated for months, not proof, but increasingly difficult to explain innocently. Then came the breakthrough. A cloud backup recovered an email chain. Nothing illegal, nothing confidential, at least not directly. Yet the context mattered. Natalie had forwarded Derek multiple articles discussing Harborline's potential public offering. Alongside the articles, she added comments, observations, predictions, personal insights, information gathered from conversations at home. Some messages seemed harmless, others felt different, much different. Olivia spent hours reviewing them. Eventually, she looked toward Griffin. "Did you ever authorize this?" "No." "Did you know about it?" "No." She nodded. Neither answer surprised her, because the messages revealed a troubling pattern. Natalie wasn't simply discussing her husband's company. She was helping Derek understand it, piece by piece, month after month. The implications remained unclear. The direction did not. By early autumn, Harborline's stock had recovered almost completely. Investors appeared satisfied. The media frenzy faded. The pressure campaign lost momentum. Facts had begun replacing speculation, and facts favored Griffin. That didn't mean the situation ended. Far from it, because the deeper investigators looked, the more questions appeared. One evening, Griffin returned home after a 14-hour day. The house felt unusually quiet. Boxes remained stacked inside a guest room. Natalie had already moved into a luxury apartment in Bellevue. Most of her belongings were gone. The absence felt strange, not painful, strange, like walking through a familiar building after major renovations. The shape remained recognizable. Everything else changed. Griffin sat at the kitchen table. His laptop displayed another report, another timeline, another collection of evidence. Then his phone rang. Olivia. Her voice carried unusual energy. "We got it." "What?" "The device production." Griffin sat straighter. "What did you find?" "Not everything." A pause. "But enough." Olivia sounded almost cautious, as if she didn't want to overstate the importance. "We recovered communications referencing Harborline directly." Griffin remained silent, listening, thinking, waiting. "The messages aren't complete." "Okay." But they established something important. What? Olivia opened a file on her end, then read a short excerpt, only a few words, yet those words changed everything. According to the recovered message Derek had written, keep collecting information. Timing matters. The sentence lingered in the silence. Simple, direct, damaging. Because timing had always mattered. The IPO timing, the divorce timing, the media timing, the trading timing. Everything came back to timing. Olivia continued. We're still analyzing the data. You think there's more? I know there's more. That certainty caught Griffin's attention. Olivia rarely sounded certain without reason. What aren't you telling me? A pause, then her answer. We found references to a document. What document? We don't have it yet. Another pause. But multiple communications mention the same file. Griffin waited. Olivia finally said the name. Mercer Exit Strategy. The title meant nothing immediately. Then Griffin remembered. Mercer, his last name. Powell. His middle name was Mercer. Very few people used it, almost nobody, which meant the document wasn't generic. It wasn't random. It was about him. Directly, personally, deliberately. Griffin stared through the dark kitchen window. The reflection staring back looked calm. Inside, however, a realization was forming. For months, he had assumed Natalie and Derek were reacting to Harborline's success. Now it appeared possible they had been planning around it. Long before the divorce papers ever arrived. Long before the IPO. Long before the first public accusation. And somewhere out there existed a file named Mercer Exit Strategy. A file that might finally explain everything. The deposition room looked nothing like a courtroom. No elevated bench, no audience, no dramatic atmosphere. Just a conference table, several chairs, a court reporter, and enough legal paperwork to fill multiple boxes. Yet Olivia Bennett preferred depositions, because people often revealed more in quiet rooms than they did in front of judges. 3 weeks after the discovery breakthrough, Natalie Powell sat across from Olivia for her sworn deposition. The conference room occupied the 18th floor of a law office in downtown Seattle. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city skyline disappeared beneath low clouds. Griffin sat at the far end of the table. A yellow legal pad rested in front of him. A black pen sat beside it. He hadn't written much, mostly dates, occasional observations, patterns, always patterns. Natalie arrived with attorney Linda Carver. She looked composed, carefully composed, but Griffin noticed subtle differences, small things. The confidence she displayed during the first court hearing had faded. Her smile appeared less natural. Her posture seemed tighter. Her eyes moved more frequently. Not panic, pressure. Olivia noticed it too. The deposition began shortly after 9. Basic questions came first. Personal information, employment history, financial disclosures, routine matters. Nothing controversial, nothing surprising. The court reporter documented every answer, every pause, every correction. Everything became part of the record. Natalie handled the opening questions easily. She appeared prepared, comfortable, confident. Then Olivia gradually changed direction. The shift was almost invisible. A date here, a trip there, a business conference, a hotel stay, a dinner reservation. Individually, each question felt harmless. Together, they built something larger. Olivia asked about San Francisco. Natalie answered, Chicago. Another answer, Austin. Another answer, then Bellevue. A brief pause. Not long, just long enough for Griffin to notice. The court reporter noticed too. Everything was recorded. Olivia continued, Do you know Derek Whitmore? Yes. How long have you known him? Approximately 1 year. How did you meet? Through professional networking events. Olivia nodded. Nothing confrontational, nothing dramatic. Then she produced several photographs, the same images Griffin had seen weeks earlier. Hotel events, industry conferences, fundraisers, social gatherings. Natalie confirmed she appeared in the photographs. Olivia moved forward. Another photograph, then another, then another. Each image narrowed the timeline. Each image strengthened the connection. Natalie remained careful. Her answers remained measured. Yet the pressure was increasing. Griffin could see it. Everyone could. Olivia then shifted toward financial matters. Did you ever make payments to Whitmore Strategic Advisors? Yes. For what purpose? Financial consulting. Can you describe the consulting services? Natalie hesitated, only briefly. General financial advice. Olivia slid several invoices across the table. Can you identify any specific services provided? Another pause, a slightly longer one. Natalie's attorney objected. The objection was noted. The question remained. Natalie eventually answered. Investment planning. Olivia made a note, then continued. What investment specifically? Natalie struggled. Not dramatically, just enough to become noticeable. The answers grew less detailed, less precise, less convincing. By late morning, the deposition entered more difficult territory. Communication records, call logs, message histories, meeting schedules. The evidence accumulated gradually, one piece at a time. Olivia never rushed. She didn't need to. Facts were doing the work. A hotel invoice appeared. Natalie acknowledged it. A restaurant receipt appeared. Natalie acknowledged it. A flight itinerary appeared. Natalie acknowledged it. Then Olivia introduced communication records recovered during discovery. Thousands of interactions, calls, messages, emails, months of contact. The room became noticeably quieter. Natalie reviewed the documents. Her expression remained controlled, but Griffin saw the change. The answers became shorter. The pauses became longer. The certainty disappeared. Around noon, Olivia introduced a new exhibit, an email exchange, one Griffin had never seen before. The message chain involved Natalie and Derek. Nothing explicit, nothing romantic. Yet the subject matter mattered. Harborline, company valuation, market expectations, IPO timing. The room remained silent as Natalie reviewed the pages. Then Olivia asked a simple question. Did you discuss Harborline Analytics with Mr. Whitmore? Occasionally. How often? I don't know. Would weekly be accurate? Natalie looked down, then back up. Possibly. Would daily be accurate during certain periods? A longer pause. Sometimes. Olivia nodded, then moved to the next exhibit. Another recovered communication, another discussion, another reference, again involving Harborline, again involving Derek, again involving timing. By early afternoon, Natalie no longer appeared comfortable. Neither did Linda Carver. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. The communication wasn't accidental. It wasn't occasional. It wasn't casual. It was sustained, deliberate, repeated. Then Olivia reached the message that changed the room. The court reporter adjusted her headset. Linda Carver sat straighter. Even Griffin stopped writing. Olivia projected the recovered communication onto a monitor. A short message from Derek. One sentence. No ambiguity. No room for interpretation. File before market close. It gives us leverage. Silence followed. Complete silence. Natalie stared at the screen. The court reporter waited. Olivia spoke calmly. What is Mr. Whitmore referring to? Natalie didn't answer immediately. The delay stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 15, an eternity inside a deposition room. Finally, her attorney objected. The objection was recorded. The question remained. Natalie answered quietly. I don't know. Olivia looked unconvinced. So did everyone else. Because the timing mattered. The message date appeared directly beneath the text. 3 days before the divorce filing. 3 days before Harborline's public debut. 3 days before everything changed. Olivia allowed the silence to settle. Then she continued. Did you discuss filing for divorce with Mr. Whitmore before filing? Yes. Did he provide advice? Some. What kind of advice? Natalie shifted in her chair. General advice. The answer sounded weak. Even she seemed aware of it. Olivia made another note, then reached for a final folder. Thicker than the others. More important. The folder recovered from the cloud storage review, the one investigators spent weeks analyzing, the one connected to repeated references throughout discovery. Olivia opened it carefully, then removed a single document. Griffin immediately recognized the file name, Mercer Exit Strategy. The title appeared at the top of the page, large, centered, impossible to miss. Natalie's eyes widened slightly, not dramatically, but enough. For the first time all day, genuine surprise appeared. Olivia noticed. So did Griffin. The document had existed, just as the investigators suspected, just as Olivia believed. Now it sat on the conference table. Real, physical, documented. Olivia slid the first page toward Natalie. "Have you seen this before?" Natalie stared at it. The room remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The court reporter looked up, waiting. Everyone waited. Finally, Natalie answered, barely above a whisper. "Yes." Olivia nodded, then asked the question Griffin had been waiting to hear for weeks. "When did you first see it?" Natalie looked down at the document, then toward her attorney, then back toward Olivia. The hesitation told its own story, and Griffin realized something. The deposition was no longer about proving whether a plan existed. The plan existed. The document proved that. Now the only question was how much of it Natalie had helped create. The room remained silent for several seconds after Natalie admitted she had seen the document. Not because anyone was surprised, because the admission changed everything. Until that moment, Mercer Exit Strategy had existed mostly as a theory, a file name, a reference recovered from cloud storage, a shadow moving through thousands of pages of discovery. Now it was real, and Natalie had acknowledged it under oath. Olivia Bennett didn't rush. She rarely did. The most effective moments in legal proceedings often came from allowing people enough silence to hear their own answers. Natalie sat motionless. The document rested in front of her. Her attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. Across the table, Griffin Powell simply watched. No satisfaction, no anger, no triumph, just observation. The same way he approached complicated engineering problems, one fact at a time, one answer at a time. Olivia finally spoke. "When did you first see this document?" Natalie swallowed. "A few months ago." "Can you be more specific?" "Approximately 4 months." Olivia made a note, then continued. "Who created it?" Natalie hesitated. "Derek." The answer landed heavily, not because it was unexpected, because it confirmed what the evidence had been suggesting for weeks. Derek Whitmore wasn't simply advising Natalie. He was designing strategy, carefully, deliberately, methodically. Olivia turned a page. "Did you contribute to the document?" "A little." "What does a little mean?" Natalie looked toward Linda Carver. The attorney objected. The objection was noted. Natalie answered anyway. "I gave opinions." Olivia nodded. "What kind of opinions?" Silence. Another pause. Another hesitation. Then Natalie answered. "About timing." The word hung in the room. Timing. Everything seemed to come back to timing. The IPO timing. The divorce timing. The media timing. The trading timing. The timing of every major decision. Olivia opened the document. The first page appeared on the monitor. Mercer Exit Strategy, version 3.2, prepared by Derek Whitmore. The subtitle appeared below. Post-IPO Leverage Framework. Nobody spoke. Even Linda Carver seemed caught off guard. The title alone was devastating, because it revealed intent, not emotion, not heartbreak, not marital conflict, strategy, leverage, financial positioning. The language sounded less like a divorce and more like a business transaction. Olivia turned another page. The room remained still. The document outlined a multi-stage plan. Media pressure, settlement pressure, public narrative management, asset negotiation, projected outcomes, expected timelines, risk assessments. Each section appeared professionally prepared, almost corporate, almost clinical. Griffin read every word. Nothing surprised him anymore, yet seeing it written down felt different. The assumptions were clear. The plan expected Harborline's IPO to dramatically increase Griffin's wealth. The plan expected public allegations to pressure him. The plan expected rapid settlement negotiations. Most importantly, the plan expected Natalie to obtain a substantial financial recovery before the legal facts could be fully examined. The strategy depended on speed. Speed created leverage. Leverage created money. That was the theory. Olivia continued questioning. Did you review this document? Yes. Did you discuss it with Mr. Whitmore? Yes. Multiple times. Yes. Each answer came more quietly than the one before. The confidence visible months earlier had disappeared. Not because Natalie suddenly felt remorse. At least Griffin couldn't know that. What he could observe was something else. The collapse of certainty. People behaved differently when plans failed, and this plan had clearly failed. Olivia pointed toward a highlighted section. Please read paragraph 4. Natalie looked down, then read aloud. The words sounded worse spoken aloud than they appeared on paper. Recommended filing window, immediately before or during IPO event, to maximize negotiation pressure and perceived exposure. The sentence echoed through the room. Nobody needed Olivia to explain it. The meaning was obvious. The divorce timing wasn't coincidence. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated, documented, planned, months in advance. Olivia allowed the significance to settle. Then she asked another question. Did you agree with this recommendation? Natalie looked down. I did. The answer came barely above a whisper. Griffin remained still. But internally, something important happened. Not vindication. Clarity. Because uncertainty creates noise. Facts remove noise. For weeks, speculation surrounded the timing of the divorce. Now the truth existed in black and white. The filing wasn't driven by emotion. It was driven by strategy. Olivia turned another page, then another. The further they progressed, the more uncomfortable the document became. Some sections analyzed Griffin's personality. Others estimated likely responses. One paragraph described him as conflict-averse. Another predicted he would prioritize Harborline's public image over personal financial outcomes. Another suggested media pressure could accelerate concessions. Derek had studied him, carefully, systematically. The realization felt strange. A man Griffin barely knew had spent months developing a strategic profile of his life, yet Derek had made one major mistake. He misunderstood Griffin's relationship with facts. Pressure worked on people who feared exposure. Griffin feared exposure less than most because he maintained records, evidence, documentation, verification, things Derek apparently underestimated. Around mid-afternoon, the deposition paused briefly. Everyone stretched. Water bottles were replaced. The court reporter reviewed notes. Then the questioning resumed. This time, Olivia shifted focus. Money. Specific money. Specific transactions. Specific accounts. The questions became increasingly precise. Whitmore's strategic advisors, consulting payments, travel expenses, conference reimbursements, investment discussions. Eventually, Olivia arrived at the subject Griffin had been waiting for: trading activity. The room immediately grew tense. Did Mr. Whitmore discuss Harborline investments with you? Natalie looked uncomfortable. Sometimes. Did he discuss Harborline stock? Before the IPO? Yes. Natalie hesitated, then nodded, a small motion, yet enormously significant. Olivia continued. Did he discuss anticipated valuation? Sometimes. Did he discuss expected market performance? Another hesitation. Yes. Linda Carver objected repeatedly. The objections accumulated. The answers continued. By the end of the session, a troubling picture had emerged. Not necessarily criminal, not necessarily illegal, but troubling. Conversations occurred, information moved, expectations formed, plans developed, and Derek appeared at the center of everything. The deposition finally ended shortly after 5 o'clock. Everyone looked exhausted. Natalie left first. Linda followed close behind. Neither seemed interested in conversation. Olivia organized her materials carefully, then looked toward Griffin. Well, well, she smiled slightly. That was productive. An understatement. The deposition had changed the case, fundamentally, perhaps permanently. Griffin gathered his notes, then noticed Olivia holding several additional pages. What are those? The last recovered files. Anything important? Olivia considered the question, then handed him the documents. The pages contained internal notes attached to Mercer exit strategy. Most were ordinary. Strategy revisions, draft language, timeline updates. Then Griffin saw a familiar sentence, a sentence that immediately caught his attention. Derek had written, "Primary risk Powell may possess documentation we cannot anticipate." Griffin read it twice, then a third time. Olivia noticed. He was worried about records. He should have been. The statement earned a quiet laugh, because it was true. For 11 years, Griffin documented everything. Not because he expected betrayal, because documentation solved problems. Now those habits were protecting him. Again. Olivia closed the folder. "We'll be filing additional motions. Based on this, among other things." Griffin nodded. The day had revealed a great deal, yet one question remained unanswered. Perhaps the most important question. If Derek invested so much effort into building the plan, if he invested so much effort into timing the divorce, if he invested so much effort into media pressure, what exactly did he stand to gain? Because the deeper Griffin looked, the less this seemed like a simple relationship, and the more it resembled a financial operation. As they left the conference room, Olivia's phone vibrated. She checked the screen, then stopped walking. Her expression changed immediately. Not surprise, concern, focused concern. "What is it?" Griffin asked. Olivia looked up. "We just received another compliance update." Griffin waited. Olivia lowered the phone slowly. "The investigators traced additional Harborline-related trades." A pause followed. Then she added the part that mattered. "The trail leads much closer to Derek than we thought." By November, the divorce no longer looked like the case Natalie Powell originally imagined. The strategy outlined inside Mercer exit strategy depended on momentum, fast pressure, fast settlements, fast concessions. Instead, everything slowed down. Facts had a way of slowing things down, and facts increasingly favored Griffin Powell. The weeks following Natalie's deposition proved especially difficult for her side. Not because of public opinion, not because of media coverage, because every new document seemed to reinforce the same conclusion. The divorce filing had been strategically timed. The pressure campaign had been deliberate. The assumptions behind the plan had been wrong. Most importantly, the postnuptial agreement remained firmly intact. That reality changed the financial landscape completely. One rainy Tuesday morning, Griffin arrived at Olivia Bennett's office for a mediation session. The conference room overlooked Elliott Bay. Cargo ships drifted slowly through gray water. Clouds hung low above the city. The atmosphere inside the room felt colder than the weather outside. Natalie sat at one end of the table, Linda Carver beside her. For the first time since the divorce began, Derek Whitmore was absent. Griffin noticed immediately. So did Olivia. The empty chair mattered, because Derek had been involved in almost every major decision up to this point. Now he was nowhere to be seen. Natalie appeared tired, not physically, mentally. The confidence she displayed months earlier seemed increasingly difficult to maintain. Olivia opened the meeting. "The purpose today is settlement discussion." Simple, professional, direct. Everyone understood what that meant. Avoid trial if possible, reduce costs, resolve disputes, move forward. Natalie spoke first, not her attorney, her. That alone surprised Griffin. She cleared her throat, then looked directly across the table. "I want this finished." Griffin said nothing. Olivia nodded. "What proposal are you presenting?" Natalie slid a folder across the table. Linda Carver added supporting documents. Olivia reviewed everything carefully. The room remained silent. Several minutes passed. Finally, Olivia closed the folder, then looked at Griffin. The proposal was substantial, very substantial. Natalie wanted a large cash settlement, far larger than what existing marital assets justified, far smaller than Harborline stock would have produced, which told Griffin something important. The strategy had changed. Originally, Natalie wanted access to Harborline. Now she wanted money. Any money. As much as possible. As quickly as possible. The difference mattered. Olivia leaned back. "We reject this." The response arrived instantly. No hesitation. No negotiation. Natalie's expression tightened. "What?" Olivia remained calm. "We reject it. You didn't even discuss it. We reviewed it." Natalie's frustration became visible. For months she operated from a position of perceived strength. Now that strength was fading, rapidly. She looked toward Griffin. "You're really going to do this?" Griffin finally spoke. His voice remained quiet. "I'm doing exactly what I've done from the beginning." Natalie stared. "What does that mean?" "It means we'll divide marital property fairly." The answer sounded simple, because it was. Griffin had never argued against legitimate division. The house, joint accounts, vehicles, retirement contributions accumulated during the marriage, all legitimate, all subject to division. Harborline was different. The agreement made that clear. The court had repeatedly acknowledged it. Natalie knew it. Everyone knew it. She just didn't like it. Olivia opened another folder, a detailed asset schedule. Every major asset, every valuation, every account, every obligation, everything documented, everything supported. "We're offering equitable distribution under Washington law." Natalie barely looked at it, because she already understood the problem. The numbers were real. The numbers were fair. The numbers simply weren't what she expected. Not even close. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. Proposal, counterproposal, discussion, clarification, rejection, again and again. Eventually, frustration began replacing strategy. Natalie's voice grew sharper, her answers shorter, her patience thinner. Griffin noticed something else. Every time financial questions became difficult, Natalie glanced toward her phone, almost automatically, as though expecting someone, waiting for someone, looking for someone. Derek. But Derek never appeared. The absence grew increasingly noticeable. Around noon, mediation paused for lunch. Participants separated into different rooms. Olivia and Griffin occupied a smaller conference room overlooking the waterfront. Neither touched the catered sandwiches waiting on the table. Olivia reviewed notes instead. After several minutes, Griffin asked the question both had been thinking. "Where's Derek?" Olivia looked up. "Good question." "You know something." She considered the statement, then nodded. "A little." Griffin waited. Olivia closed her notebook. "The compliance investigations are expanding." "Related to Harborline?" "Partly." Another pause. Then she continued. "Several regulatory inquiries now involve trading activity connected to Derek's network." The wording was careful, deliberately careful. Griffin understood why. Nothing had been proven. Yet, still the implications remained significant. What does that mean for him? It means he's busy. The answer carried more weight than the words themselves. Busy answering questions. Busy hiring attorneys. Busy explaining transactions. Busy dealing with problems larger than a divorce. For the first time, Griffin wondered whether Derek's priorities had shifted completely. Maybe the divorce no longer mattered. Maybe survival mattered more. The mediation resumed shortly afterward. Natalie appeared increasingly agitated. The negotiation wasn't moving in her favor. The leverage she expected never materialized. The pressure campaign failed. The media strategy failed. The postnuptial challenge failed. One by one, the assumptions inside Mercer exit strategy collapsed. Reality replaced projections. Reality rarely negotiates. Late in the afternoon, Natalie finally broke. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just honestly, for a moment. She looked directly at Griffin. "You don't even care, do you?" The question surprised everyone, even Linda Carver. Griffin thought carefully before answering. I care. About what? The truth. Natalie laughed bitterly. The truth. Yes. She shook her head. You always do that. What? Act like everything is a spreadsheet. The comment lingered. Maybe there was some truth inside it. Griffin did trust facts more than emotions, documentation more than assumptions, evidence more than stories. The habits that built Harborline now shaped his response to betrayal, not because he lacked feelings, because feelings alone solved nothing. Olivia ended the discussion shortly afterward. No agreement, no settlement, no resolution. Not today. As everyone gathered their belongings, Natalie checked her phone again. Then once more. Each time the same result. Nothing. No call, no message, no Derek. The realization seemed to hit her gradually, like weather changing, slowly. Then, all at once, outside the building, evening darkness settled across Seattle. Streetlights reflected against wet pavement. Ferries moved through Elliott Bay. The city continued normally. Griffin walked toward the parking garage with Olivia. Halfway there, his phone vibrated. A message from Harborline's legal department. Brief, direct, important. He opened it, then stopped walking. What happened? Olivia asked. Griffin handed her the phone. She read the message, then read it again. The update concerned Derek Whitmore. Specifically, several financial institutions had begun restricting activity connected to accounts under review. Not frozen, not yet. Restricted, monitored, examined. Olivia slowly returned the phone. That's fast. Very. Neither spoke for several moments, because both understood the significance. People under routine review rarely attracted that level of attention. Something bigger was happening. Something moving beyond family court. Something Derek probably never anticipated. Across town, Natalie was likely still waiting for answers. Waiting for guidance. Waiting for support. Waiting for the man who spent months helping design the plan. The problem was that Derek Whitmore suddenly had problems of his own, and judging by everything Griffin had seen, Derek appeared increasingly interested in protecting Derek. Not Natalie. Not the strategy. Not the relationship. Just himself. As Griffin started his car, another message arrived. This one from an unknown source. Only a screenshot. No explanation. No signature. The image displayed a recent communication attempt. Natalie calling Derek. 5 times. No answer. Griffin stared at the screen, then locked the phone. For the first time since the divorce began, he wondered whether Natalie had finally discovered the same truth he discovered months earlier. The people who build plans around money often disappear when the money becomes dangerous. Derek Whitmore disappeared on a Thursday morning. Not officially. Not at first. There were no announcements, no statements, no dramatic exits. Just silence. The kind that only became noticeable after enough noise had already existed. Griffin Powell first heard about it from Olivia Bennett. Her call came at 6:48 a.m. Short, direct. Derek's counsel just requested an emergency extension on all filings. Griffin paused at his kitchen counter. Extension for what? Olivia didn't hesitate. For everything. That answer said more than any detailed explanation could. By mid-morning, more pieces followed. Derek missed scheduled compliance meetings. 2 financial institutions escalated internal reviews. A brokerage connected to Whitmore Capital Holdings restricted outgoing transfers. By afternoon, the pattern was unmistakable. Derek Whitmore was no longer controlling his situation. He was reacting to it, and reacting poorly. Griffin sat in his office at Harborline, watching the reports accumulate on his screen. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Each update confirmed what he already suspected. The structure around Derek was collapsing, slowly, quietly, but consistently. Olivia arrived just before noon. She didn't sit immediately. She placed a file on Griffin's desk first. This is the latest compliance summary. Griffin opened it, then scanned, then stopped. Several pages detailed aggressive regulatory scrutiny. Not accusations, not charges. Scrutiny. That distinction mattered. Regulators didn't move quickly without reason. and they didn't expand investigations without signals. What triggered this? Griffin asked. Olivia leaned against the desk. Multiple flagged trades, timing irregularities, cross-account correlations. She paused. Your name keeps appearing indirectly. Griffin looked up. Indirectly, yes. A second pause. Through derivatives positioning linked to Whitmore Capital. The room grew quiet. Outside the glass wall, Seattle moved normally. Cars, people, rain. Inside, everything felt narrower, focused. Griffin closed the file slowly. Does this connect to Natalie? Olivia considered the question carefully. Not directly. Then she added, but everything connects to Derek. That was the first time she said it that plainly. Not suspicion, not theory. Connection. Griffin stood and walked to the window. Lake Union stretched beyond the buildings, gray and still. You think he used her? He said. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Careful lawyers rarely rushed into moral conclusions, but when she finally spoke, her voice was lower. I think he used the situation, a difference that mattered. Natalie might have believed she was part of a personal strategy. Derek might have been running something larger, much larger. That evening, Griffin drove to Tacoma, not for business, not for court, for his father. Harold Powell lived in a modest house near the harbor. Same house for 30 years, same porch light, same worn wooden steps. Harold opened the door before Griffin knocked twice. You look tired, his father said. I'm fine. That's what tired people say. Griffin didn't argue. They sat in the small kitchen, tea steaming between them. For a while, neither spoke. Then Harold finally nodded toward Griffin's briefcase. You still carrying everything in there? Griffin glanced at it. Yes. Harold gave a quiet hum. Some things you can't put down easily. Griffin sat back. That depends on whether you trust people. His father smiled faintly. Or whether you trust patterns more. That line lingered, because it cut closer than Harold likely intended. Griffin trusted patterns. Patterns had built his company. Patterns had protected his company. Patterns were now revealing the structure of his personal collapse, or what had been designed to look like one. Later that night, Griffin received another call from Olivia. Her tone was different this time. Something just changed. What happened? Derek's legal team submitted a full disclosure package to regulators. Griffin frowned. Voluntarily? That's the strange part. A pause. He didn't wait for enforcement. Griffin understood immediately. Voluntary disclosure wasn't cooperation. It was control. It meant Derek was trying to shape the narrative before someone else did. Olivia continued. And there's something else. What he named Natalie. The words landed sharply. Griffin didn't respond for several seconds. Named her how involved party context, communication records, timeline reference. Olivia exhaled. Not as a target, not as a defendant, but as part of the operational timeline. Operational timeline. The phrase didn't belong in a divorce case. Griffin walked slowly toward his window. The city lights below looked distant, smaller than usual. Is she in trouble? He asked. Olivia answered carefully. Not legally, not yet. Then she added, but she's now part of something she probably didn't understand. The implication was clear. Natalie might have believed she was participating in leveraged negotiations. Derek might have been building exposure buffers, or trading structures, or both. The truth was still forming. But one thing was becoming increasingly obvious. Natalie was no longer positioned as a strategist. She was positioned as data. The next morning, Griffin received a message from Natalie, the first in weeks. It contained only 4 words. We need to talk. No tone, no explanation, just necessity. Griffin read it once, then again, then forwarded it to Olivia. Her response came quickly. Don't meet alone. I wasn't planning to. A pause. Then Olivia added, this is no longer just divorce litigation. Griffin already knew that. He met Natalie 2 days later in a neutral location, a quiet cafe near downtown Seattle, early morning, almost empty. Natalie arrived first. She looked different, not dramatically, subtly, less controlled, less rehearsed. She didn't smile when he sat down. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been responding through counsel. That's not the same thing." Griffin didn't argue. Natalie studied him, then spoke again. "Did you know what about Derek?" A pause. Griffin answered honestly. "I knew enough." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." Natalie looked away. For the first time, uncertainty replaced frustration. "He said this would be simple," she said quietly. Griffin didn't react, because that sentence revealed more than she realized. Simple was never part of what Derek had built. Nothing about the last 6 months had been simple. Natalie continued. "He said you would settle." Griffin met her eyes. "And you believed him?" Silence. That was the answer. Not spoken, but present. Natalie exhaled slowly. "I didn't want to hurt you." Griffin nodded once. "I believe that." A pause. "But you still participated." Her expression tightened. "I thought it was fair." "Fair for who?" She didn't answer immediately, because the question had no comfortable response. Finally, she said, "I thought I was protecting myself." Griffin leaned back. "That part I understand." The truth was complicated, but not unclear. Natalie had entered a structure she believed was about protection. Derek had likely framed it as strategy. The legal system had turned it into something else entirely. Exposure, accountability, evidence. Natalie lowered her voice. "I didn't know it would become this." Griffin studied her for a moment. "I know. That was the difference between anger and understanding, between reaction and clarity." Natalie blinked. "You're not angry, I was," he said simply. "Now I'm past that." The words weren't emotional. They were final. Natalie looked down at her hands. For the first time, she didn't seem to be planning or calculating, just realizing. "I think he left me in this," she said. Griffin didn't respond immediately, because that was no longer speculation. It was alignment. Everything Olivia had found, everything compliance had flagged, everything regulators were reviewing, it all pointed in the same direction. Derek Whitmore was no longer protecting Natalie. He was protecting himself. Natalie finally looked up. "What happens now?" Griffin thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Now everything gets documented." A pause. "And then it gets decided." Outside, Seattle's morning traffic continued. Normal, unaware. But inside that small cafe, something had changed permanently. Not reconciliation, not resolution, but recognition. The system behind everything had revealed itself, and once a system was seen clearly, it could no longer operate invisibly. The message arrived during a board briefing at Harborline. Griffin Powell saw Natalie's name flash on his phone screen and didn't react immediately. He waited until the meeting ended. Only then did he step into the hallway and open it. "We need to talk. Please." Not through lawyers. 3 sentences. No context. No strategy. Just exhaustion disguised as urgency. Griffin read it once, then locked the phone. Olivia Bennett was waiting outside the conference room. "You saw it?" she said. "Yes. Are you going to respond?" Griffin shook his head. "Not yet." Olivia studied him. "That's new." Griffin almost smiled. "It's not new. It's just necessary now." Because everything before this point had been reactive. Now it was controlled, measured, documented. By mid-afternoon, Olivia had already scheduled a supervised meeting. Neutral location, recorded attendance, no private communication channels, everything by protocol. Natalie agreed quickly, too quickly. That was the first thing Griffin noticed. The second was that Derek Whitmore did not appear anywhere in the arrangement. No legal representation, no advisory input, no presence at all. That absence felt louder than anything he had said or done before. The meeting was set for the following morning at a small private conference room in a legal office downtown. When Griffin arrived, Natalie was already there, sitting near the window, hands folded tightly, no phone on the table, No documents. No attorney beside her at first. Just her. When Griffin entered, she looked up immediately, and for a brief moment something unguarded crossed her face. Not anger, not calculation, uncertainty. Griffin sat across from her. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Natalie broke the silence. "He's gone quiet." Griffin didn't respond. She continued anyway. "Derek." He stopped answering calls. Still no reaction. "He hasn't replied in days." Griffin leaned slightly forward. "That's not unusual anymore." Natalie's jaw tightened. "You knew this would happen." "No," he said calmly. "But I understood the pattern." That word again. Pattern. It always came back to patterns. Natalie exhaled slowly. "I thought he had control over everything." Griffin studied her carefully. "People who say that usually don't." Her expression shifted slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means control isn't something people have. It's something they think they have until the structure collapses." Natalie looked down. For a moment, silence returned. Then she spoke again. "I didn't think it would get this far." Griffin nodded once. "I know." And he did, because most people never believed consequences would fully arrive. Until they did. Natalie rubbed her hands together. "He told me it would be straightforward." Griffin didn't interrupt. "He said your agreement wouldn't hold." Another pause. "He said the IPO timing would force negotiation." Griffin listened quietly. "He said you were predictable." That last sentence landed differently. Not because it was insulting, but because it was incorrect. Griffin had never been predictable. He was consistent. There was a difference. Natalie looked up. He was wrong. "Yes," Griffin said simply. The truth sat between them, uncomfortable, undeniable. Natalie leaned back slightly. "I didn't recognize what he was doing." Griffin tilted his head slightly. "That's possible." A pause. "But you still participated." The words weren't accusatory, just factual. Natalie didn't respond immediately. Then she nodded. Yes, that acknowledgement mattered more than any argument, because everything in the case now revolved around participation. Not intention, not emotion. Participation. Outside, Seattle traffic moved steadily along the street below. Inside, the air felt still. Natalie finally spoke again. "What happens to me now?" Griffin considered the question carefully. It wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. The kind of question people asked when they realized the structure around them had changed without warning. "Legally," he said. She nodded. "The court process continues. And I follow the agreement." Natalie looked away. "Just like that?" "Yes." A pause. "But that doesn't mean nothing changes." She looked back at him. What changes? Griffin chose his words carefully. Understanding. Natalie frowned slightly. "That doesn't help me." "No," he agreed. "Not immediately." Silence followed. Then Natalie said something quieter. "I didn't want to hurt you." Griffin didn't react. I believe that he said. But it still happened. Her eyes dropped again. The weight of that truth settled between them. Not dramatic, not explosive, just final. After a long pause, she asked another question. "Did you ever think I was part of something bigger?" Griffin didn't hesitate. "No." That answer surprised her. He continued. "I thought you were reacting to our situation." Natalie exhaled slowly. So did I. The simplicity of that statement made it heavier, because both of them had been operating under incomplete understanding. Different assumptions, different interpretations, same events. Then Natalie said something that shifted the tone again. "He disappeared when things got complicated." Griffin looked at her. "Yes, that wasn't part of the plan." "No," he said. "It wasn't your plan. That distinction mattered." Natalie frowned. "What do you mean?" Griffin leaned back slightly. "Plans fail when they depend on someone who is also planning." She stared at him, understanding slowly forming. Derek had his own agenda. Yes. And it wasn't me. Griffin didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "You were part of it." The words weren't cruel. They were precise. Natalie's expression tightened. That's what this was. Griffin didn't respond right away, because the answer wasn't simple. Finally, he said, "It became that." Natalie looked down again. Long silence followed. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I thought I was making a choice." "You were," Griffin said. "But choices don't always lead where people expect." A long pause. Then Natalie asked the question that seemed to have been building since the beginning. "Do you hate me?" Griffin looked at her for a moment. The question felt misplaced. Too emotional for what remained. Too personal for what had already become procedural. "No," he said. The answer surprised her. "Then what do you feel?" Griffin thought carefully. Clarity. That was the only accurate word left. Natalie blinked slowly. "That's it for now." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to find something familiar, something that used to be there. But whatever she was looking for wasn't present anymore. Finally, she nodded. "I think I understand now." Griffin didn't respond, because understanding didn't change outcomes. It only changed perception. Natalie stood slowly. "So this is it. It's not the end," Griffin said. "Just the structure changing." She gave a small, almost tired nod. Then she hesitated. "Did I ruin something?" Griffin considered the question. "No." A pause. "You participated in something that collapsed under its own assumptions." That distinction mattered, because it removed moral distortion, replaced it with structure. Natalie nodded again, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped. Without turning around, she said quietly, "I didn't recognize who you were anymore." Griffin replied evenly, "Neither did I." And that was the truth neither of them had expected at the beginning. After she left, Griffin remained seated for several minutes. No movement, no calls, no documents, just silence. Eventually, Olivia entered the room. "She's gone," she said. "Yes." Olivia studied him. "You okay?" Griffin looked toward the window. Seattle continued moving below, unchanged, unaware. "Yes," he said finally. "I think I am." Not because everything was resolved, but because everything was now visible, and visibility changed everything. Outside, the rain began again. Light at first, then steady. And for the first time in months, Griffin Powell didn't think about what was coming next. He simply thought about what was already known, and that was enough. The courtroom felt different this time. Not quieter, not larger. Just final in a way earlier hearings had not been. Griffin Powell noticed it the moment he stepped inside King County Superior Court. There were no surprises left in the room. No hidden strategies. No unspoken alliances. Only structure. Judge Eleanor Whitaker reviewed the file in front of her with the same steady expression she had maintained throughout the case. Natalie Powell sat at the opposite table, this time alone. Derek Whitmore was not present. He had not been present for weeks, and his absence now felt like a confirmation rather than a coincidence. Olivia Bennett placed the final submission package on the table. "We are ready, Your Honor." Natalie's attorney nodded as well. "Respondent is prepared." Judge Whitaker looked up slowly. "Very well. Let's conclude this matter." The room settled into silence. Griffin sat still, not anxious, not excited, just present. The final hearing was not about discovery anymore, not about allegations, not about strategy. It was about enforcement. The law now had enough information. Everything else was procedure. Olivia began. "Your Honor, all discovery obligations have been completed. All financial disclosures verified. All contested claims have been addressed in prior filings." She paused briefly. "The remaining issue is enforcement of the existing postnuptial agreement." Natalie's attorney stood. "We maintain our position that certain provisions may have been influenced under misrepresentation." The argument sounded weaker than before. Even the tone lacked confidence. Judge Whitaker turned a page, then another. Her expression remained unchanged. "Ms. Carver, The court has already reviewed extensive documentation regarding execution of this agreement. A pause. No evidence of coercion has been substantiated. The words were calm, but definitive. Natalie shifted slightly in her seat. Griffin noticed it. Not fear, not anger. Acceptance forming slowly. Olivia continued. The agreement clearly separates all ownership interest in Harborline Analytics, including future appreciation and IPO-derived valuation. She slid a document forward, as well as intellectual property and derivative financial instruments tied to company growth. The judge reviewed it again, then looked up. The court finds the agreement valid and enforceable in full. No dramatic reaction followed, no audible gasp, just a quiet settling, like a system reaching equilibrium. Judge Whitaker continued. Accordingly, Harborline Analytics equity remains the separate property of Mr. Powell. A pause. All appreciation derived from pre-existing ownership shall likewise remain separate. She looked toward Natalie. You will receive marital assets as previously outlined in settlement disclosures. Natalie didn't respond immediately. Griffin watched her carefully. There was no visible collapse, no emotional reaction, only stillness. The kind that comes when an expected outcome finally becomes real. The judge concluded. This matter is hereby resolved under the terms stated. Gavel down, simple, final. The hearing ended. No celebration followed, no confrontation. People began gathering documents. Attorneys exchanged brief words. The court reporter closed her transcript. Normal movement resumed. But something fundamental had changed. Griffin remained seated for a moment longer than others, not because he needed time, but because the process felt strangely anticlimactic. Months of strategy, investigation, discovery, confrontation, and now it ended with a sentence. Olivia stood beside him. Done. Yes, Griffin said quietly, legally. She looked at him. That's all that matters here. Griffin nodded, then stood. As they exited the courtroom, Natalie was already speaking with her attorney. No glance toward him, no final comment, no lingering gesture, just closure in its most practical form. Down the hallway, Olivia spoke again. Derek's case is still developing. Griffin didn't slow his pace, I assumed. Federal review expanded last week. That made him pause slightly. Expanded how multiple accounts, cross-institution analysis, interconnected trades. She chose her words carefully. They're looking at patterns beyond divorce-related activity. Griffin understood immediately. This was no longer about personal relationships. It had moved beyond Natalie, beyond him, beyond even Harborline as a company. It was now about structure, financial behavior, information flow. Olivia continued. There's a possibility Derek will be called in for formal questioning. Is he still reachable? Olivia hesitated. That's uncertain. Griffin stopped walking. You don't know where he is. Not precisely. That answer said everything. Derek Whitmore had not just stepped back. He had stepped away. Not emotionally, strategically. The realization settled quietly. Griffin looked toward the courthouse doors. People moved in and out, life continuing normally around a case that had defined months of his life. It's strange, he said. What is everything that felt so large is already shrinking? Olivia nodded slowly. That's how it always works after the decision. They stepped outside. Seattle air was cold but clear. The rain had stopped. For the first time in weeks, sunlight broke through low clouds over Elliott Bay. Olivia glanced at her phone. There's something else. Griffin waited. Harborline stock stabilized fully this morning. He nodded. Good. Investor confidence is back to pre-incident levels. Again, he nodded, but something about her tone suggested she wasn't finished. There's one more update. What? She looked at him carefully. Your name is being mentioned again in financial circles. Griffin frowned slightly. In what context? Not negative. A pause. More analytical. That word mattered. Analytical meant attention. Attention meant evaluation. Evaluation meant repositioning. Griffin understood the cycle. What are they saying? Olivia allowed a faint smile. That you're not just a CTO anymore. Griffin didn't respond. She continued. They're calling you the stabilizing force behind Harborline's entire architecture. He exhaled slowly. I didn't build it alone, I know. But markets don't usually care about nuance. That was true, they rarely did. As they walked toward the parking structure, Griffin's phone vibrated. A message, unknown number again, but this time different. No threat, no pressure, just a single line. You were harder to predict than expected. Griffin stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Olivia noticed. No response. There's nothing to respond to. She nodded approvingly. They reached the garage. Before parting ways, Olivia spoke again. What happens next for you? Griffin thought about the question. Not in terms of litigation, not in terms of finance, in terms of life. I don't know yet. That's new for you. Yes. She smiled slightly. Be careful with that. Griffin almost smiled back. Why uncertainty is where most people make mistakes. He considered that, then nodded. Or where they stop assuming control. Olivia didn't argue, because she understood the difference. They separated at the entrance. Griffin drove alone for the first time in months without thinking about court filings, legal strategy, or financial exposure. Instead, he thought about silence. Not absence, but quiet clarity after noise. Natalie was no longer part of his decisions. Derek was no longer shaping outcomes. The system that had tried to use his life as leverage had already collapsed under its own assumptions. By the time Griffin reached Lake Union, the sun was fully visible, reflected across the water in broken light. He parked near the shoreline and stepped out. The city looked ordinary again. That was what surprised him most. Nothing looked like it had been changed permanently, but it had. Everything important had already happened. The rest was just continuation. Griffin stood there for a long time, then finally turned away from the water, not because he was finished, but because there was nothing left to resolve. Only what came next. The first thing Griffin Powell noticed after everything ended was how quiet his phone became. Not silence from absence, silence from relevance. No court updates, no legal requests, no urgent messages from Olivia Bennett, no unexpected compliance alerts. For the first time in months, his life stopped reacting to external pressure. It simply continued. Harborline Analytics stabilized within 2 weeks after the final ruling. Investor confidence returned quickly, as if the market had been waiting for permission to stop panicking. Analysts shifted their tone from uncertainty to admiration. The same company that had been framed as potentially unstable during litigation became remarkably resilient under executive pressure. Griffin never commented on it publicly. He rarely did. Instead, he returned to work. Not because he needed distraction, because structure mattered more than narrative. One morning, Olivia called him with a final administrative update. The last regulatory inquiry connected to Derek has been closed. Griffin stood by his kitchen counter. Outcome insufficient evidence for criminal charges, Olivia said. A pause, but strong indicators of coordinated financial misconduct were noted. Griffin didn't respond immediately, not because he was surprised, because it no longer changed anything in his world. And Natalie, he asked. Olivia hesitated. She finalized settlement distribution last week. Understood. Another pause. She moved to a different apartment in Bellevue. Griffin nodded even though she couldn't see him. Okay. Olivia's voice softened slightly. You're handling this differently than most people would. Griffin looked out the window. Seattle morning light reflected off wet streets. I'm not handling it differently, he said. I'm just done reacting to it. After the call ended, Griffin spent the rest of the morning at Harborline headquarters. No crisis meetings, no urgent board sessions, just routine architecture reviews and system optimization discussions. The engineers had already moved on. The company had moved on. Even the building itself felt calmer, as if it had absorbed the chaos and decided not to repeat it. Later that week, Griffin visited his father again in Tacoma. Harold Powell was sitting on his porch when he arrived. Same chair, same coffee mug, same quiet observation of the street. "You look lighter," Harold said as Griffin sat beside him. "I feel normal again," Griffin replied. Harold nodded slowly. "That's usually what people call recovery when nothing dramatic happens." Griffin almost smiled. "That's accurate." They sat in silence for a while. Then Harold spoke again. "Did you win?" Griffin considered the question carefully. It was the kind of question people outside legal systems asked, the kind that assumed clear winners and losers. "No," he said finally. "I don't think that's the right word." Harold glanced at him. "What is the right word?" Griffin looked out at the harbor, resolved. Harold accepted that without argument. "That sounds more expensive." Griffin let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. It was. They sat in comfortable silence again. For the first time in a long time, Griffin didn't feel the need to analyze anything. Not Natalie, not Derek, not even himself, because everything that had needed analysis had already been processed. One evening, several weeks later, Griffin found himself alone at Portage Bay Cafe near Lake Union, a place he had visited countless times before everything happened. The same table, same view, same sound of water outside. He ordered coffee, nothing more. As he sat there, he noticed something subtle. No one around him recognized him. No one watched him differently. No one associated him with headlines or lawsuits or financial speculation anymore. He had become what he used to be before everything escalated. Anonymous in public space. Visible only in function, not narrative. His phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, then opened it. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a request. It was a short sentence. "Markets move on. People don't always do." Griffin read it once, then placed the phone face down. He didn't reply, because there was nothing left to engage. Not out of anger, not out of avoidance, but because engagement implied continuation. And continuation was no longer necessary. Across the lake, sunlight reflected softly on the water. For a moment, Griffin thought about everything that had happened. Natalie Powell, the timing of the divorce, the courtroom, the deposition room, Mercer exit strategy, Derek Whitmore, the investigations, the patterns, the assumptions, the collapse. It all felt distant now, not unimportant, just complete. What remained wasn't victory, not loss, just clarity. And clarity, Griffin realized, was not loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't demand attention. It simply stayed. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Olivia. One final message. "You were right about the pattern, just not the scale." Griffin read it, then looked back at the water. He typed a response, "Thanks," then deleted it. And didn't send anything, because nothing more needed to be said. Later that afternoon, Griffin walked along the shoreline near his apartment. Lake Union was calm. Boats moved slowly in the distance. People jogged past him without noticing. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm. He stopped near the water and stood still, not thinking about strategy, not reviewing outcomes, just observing. The version of his life that had been defined by crisis no longer existed. What replaced it wasn't emptiness. It was space. And in that space, something unexpected emerged. Not ambition, not revenge, not analysis, perspective. Griffin understood now that most of what had nearly destroyed everything wasn't the divorce itself. It was assumption. Assumption of control, assumption of loyalty, assumption of predictability. Every major decision in the conflict had been built on assumptions that collapsed under scrutiny. He had avoided collapse not through force, but through documentation, through patience, through refusing to react emotionally when reaction would have created noise instead of resolution. That realization didn't feel like pride. It felt like understanding. A quiet one. As the sun began to set, Griffin turned away from the lake and started walking back. Not toward anything dramatic, not toward anything symbolic, Just forward, because forward was now the only direction that made sense. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was walking away from something. He felt like he was walking into something that no longer needed to be defended, only lived. In the end, what happened to Griffin Powell was never just about divorce money or even betrayal. It was about how quietly a life can shift when assumptions go unchallenged and when people confuse control with understanding. The most dangerous moments in his story were never the courtroom arguments or the financial accusations. They were the quiet months where decisions were made without full truth, where trust was replaced by calculation, and where small details were ignored because they didn't seem urgent at the time. Griffin didn't win because he was louder, richer, or more aggressive. He remained steady when everything around him tried to force a reaction. He relied on records when others relied on stories, and on patience when others rushed toward conclusions. In doing so, he discovered something most people only understand. Too late, clarity is not the same as revenge. Clarity is what remains when emotion no longer clouds what is real. In real life, not every situation ends with justice that feels dramatic. Sometimes it ends with quiet separation, legal resolutions, and people walking away, carrying very different understandings of the same events. But even then, there is value in what remains self-respect awareness and the ability to recognize patterns before they repeat. If this story made you think differently about trust timing, or how people reveal their true intentions, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen a situation where patience and truth eventually exposed what emotion could not? And if you enjoy deep, realistic storytelling like this, stories about hidden motives, quiet strength, and life-changing turning points, subscribe to the channel. The next story may stay with you longer than you expect.